Here to give us the Senate's view of stimulus negotiations is Senator Kevin Cramer of North Dakota. He's a member of the Budget Committee, and we're hearing that nobody's happy at this point. Senator, Democrats in the House, certain Republicans in the Senate, nobody likes the $1.8 trillion, which is not that far from 2.3, 2.4. It seems like there's more than meets the eye going on here from both sides and not wanting to move ahead with this.
Well, Joy, that's a good, I think, assessment. Nobody's happy. Sometimes when nobody's happy, that's the best deal you can get, because when all or nothing is your negotiating position at the beginning, it's one thing. But when your last negotiating position is all or nothing, you generally end up with nothing. And that's true in pretty much every kind of negotiation, but certainly true in Washington, D.C. So you're right, 1.8 trillion isn't that far from 2.3 trillion, but it's also not far from 1.2 trillion. Republicans scoff at the price tag, understandably. We've driven up an awful lot of debt. Listen to your previous segment. I have to say, Joe, I agree more with you than your guest. The idea of increased taxes and regulations frightens the heck out of me, and I think we need to avoid that, but we also need to avoid driving up this debt any further unnecessarily. And that's why a more targeted approach, as Republicans have proposed, I think is the better way to go. There are a lot of things we can agree on. Let's focus on those things, like airline support, like small business support. How about including restaurants and the travel industry in the next round? They were largely left out of the last round. And we need to build a bridge to the other side of this, to this economic slump.
So that's what Republicans would want, but that's different than what the Democrats would want. Do you think there's a common ground on an airline bill or something small, Senator?
Yeah, I think there's a common ground. The question is whether it's tenable for one side or the other to accept the fact that the other side might win something. One of the things that I have always found frustrating in Washington is when people oppose something for what's not in it. That's why I think we should find that common ground you're talking about, whether it's an extension and expansion of PPP, some help for airline industry, maybe even an extension of unemployment and insurance benefits at a more modest number than what Speaker Pelosi is providing. But we shouldn't let nothing be the conclusion just because you didn't get everything. The other problem, Joe, is there is a lot of monkey business, if you will, going on the policy side. Things like prohibiting states from requiring identification to get a ballot, for example, or allowing ballot harvesting nationwide, or stimulus checks for illegal immigrants. Those things are going to make it impossible for us to get to a deal. Let's focus on the things that we know the vast majority of people want. And we might not get 10 or 20 Republicans, and we might lose 10 Democrats, but we got to find the big, broad middle and come to a conclusion that I think the country's crying out for.
I think that's what Kudlow was saying, that if the Dems will compromise it, you'd get enough Republicans at that point, and that wouldn't be the stumbling block. What do you really think the chances are that that's going to happen, in that you talked about somebody getting a win, and there's a whole group of, we have a lot of, when we do have Republicans on, they all say that Speaker Pelosi is loath to agree to anything prior to the election.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think all or nothing's easy if you're willing to settle for nothing. I think in her case, she probably prefers nothing, because the political calculation is Democrats benefit from nothing. Then they can blame Donald Trump, and they can blame Senate Republicans, and maybe somehow she can even blame House Republicans, although I don't know how. This is why I think the reality is that a deal isn't going to be struck until after the election. Once that election pressure valve is released, then I think there's all kinds of opportunity to get something done. I think people ought to be optimistic about that, but that's not really the kind of message we ought to be sending as lawmakers.
Well, there's a group of people that think the economy's fine. You look at the stock market, or
right.
You look at what GDP is going to be, but that glosses over or hides the weak spots for industries and individuals that are truly in need.
There's no question, as good as it may look on paper on a given day, we know it's very fragile. It's certainly, this slump has lasted longer than a lot of people thought it would, which is why I think we need some sort of a bridge. But Joe, we can make the payroll for every restaurant in America, but if we don't let the restaurant owner open up, then it's not going to do a lot of good. It's just going to extend their pain. So we have to do some things that reopen the economy, including providing some of this tort relief that we've talked about as Republicans. But in the meantime, meantime, remember, we're at 7.9% unemployment. That was an aspirational goal during the Obama years. It's just that in recent retrospect, it looks like a massive failure. But to your point, it is fragile. As good as it looks, it is fragile.
Do you think that the Supreme Court hearings, the Amy Coney Barrett hearings, are going to influence the stimulus? I see nobody walking around Washington that's in Congress chews gum and walks at the same time. Typically, I've never seen it happen. I mean, do you think it's possible?
Well, it's always possible, Joe, but I don't think there's any question right now in this hyper-political moment that we're in, and it's obvious we're 2 weeks from an election, that a lot of things are going to depend on the perception of things. The Senate is particularly challenging because of our weird rules, our weird calendar. But I think from a political standpoint, the country watching Judge Amy Coney Barrett answer tough questions from Republicans and Democrats on the Judiciary Committee, and watching Democrats overplay their hand, I predict it, and I'm pretty certain of it, that will be good for Republicans. But it still doesn't get a stimulus package done. Your question is, what are the two in conflict with one another? I think they have been for several weeks now. I think the Democrats have been largely using their obstructionism to try and influence, delaying, if you will, the Amy Coney Barrett hearings, and that's not going to happen. Okay.
All right, Senator Cramer, thank you. Great state of North Dakota, right? People get that confused at North Dakota. What's the biggest difference, you think? I haven't been. How should I think of it? Who's got the
Between
Black Hills?
Yeah, so South Dakota has Mount Rushmore, North Dakota has oil.
Oil sounds better, I think. Used to, anything.
It's worked out for us. Yeah, used to. It will again.
All right. Senator, thanks.